Last week I had a chance to speak to Bluepoint Games about the upcoming release of Demon's Souls for PS5, and today I'm here to share the results with you. During this hour-long feature, you'll learn many new details about how the team adapted the game to PlayStation 5 and how Bluepoint itself has evolved to meet this new challenge. We also have some exclusive new footage showcasing the game's 30 FPS 4K native mode, along with comparisons to its performance mode. We'll have full coverage of the final game soon enough, of course, but for now, let's dig in. Hello and welcome to a special Digital Foundry direct discussion. Today we're talking about the new PlayStation 5 game Demon's Souls from Bluepoint and Sony. And this is a very special occasion because, as was the case with Shadow of the Colossus just a few years back, I am joined by members of the one and only Bluepoint to discuss the work they've done in bringing this game to life. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hi, my name's Marco Thrush. I'm president and one of the engineers on the game.
My name is Peter Dalton. I'm the technical director for Bluepoint Games.
Hi, my name's Gavin Moore. I'm the creative director for Worldwide Studios External Development.
Perfect. So, yeah, the time is almost here. The PS5 is nearly available, and Demon's Souls is finished. At least, so much as it's gold, but it's almost ready to be played, and it's obviously been a long journey. We last spoke back when you finished Shadow of the Colossus, and I got the feeling that this next project was going to be rather ambitious, and we guessed for years, what the heck could it be? And I was very pleased to see that it's Demon's Souls. But this is an interesting one, because it's the first time you guys have worked with technology, I guess, created by From Software. So I guess the first thing I'd like to know then is just, could you talk about the experience of getting your hands on that original game code, how you thought about approaching the project, and basically just give us some insight into that initial situation.
It's interesting. It's like, as we start each project, from Shadow to now Demon's Souls, it's like every time we start, it's a unique snowflake, and it's challenging. Every time we get a brand new code base we have zero experience with, it's challenging to dig in and figure out how it works. I think if you look at our process, usually we spend the first couple of months just getting the original game up and running on the original platform. So in this case, the PS3. And I think one of our keys is we have a lot of guys that have got a lot of experience building games, and so you slowly start piecing it together. Like, you start looking and like, where's the AI system, where's the render system, where's this system and that system, and you start slowly piecing it together, and then you start to find the magic that actually starts to make it tick. But it's an interesting and challenging process, and it keeps us on our toes.
We've been thinking about doing Demon's Souls for a very long time. It's a PlayStation classic. It's one of the most beloved games of PlayStation fans. And I don't think we felt that we were up to that challenge. And it wasn't until, Bluepoint Games and Japan Studio set the standard for a remake with Shadow of the Colossus on the PlayStation 4 that we felt that we could actually take on that challenge and do it justice, to be perfectly honest. And I think, the guys at Bluepoint are absolutely amazing. What they've turned out is an incredible piece of gaming history, to be perfectly honest. It's a stunning game on the PlayStation 5.
Yeah, I mean, as we discussed on the, like last time we talked during the Shadow interview, right? Like, as you're saying, it's like, yes, this is going to be a much bigger project, and, there's a lot more assets going into it, and just so much more. It's like, you don't have one single character, right, to worry about. You have all these different classes and all these costume choices, and every single one needs to look just as good as you would expect from a next-gen game. So yeah, I hope people won't be disappointed. We definitely tried our best.
I remember announcing this project to the team and telling everybody, that Demon's Souls is going to be our next project, and the team was very excited. There's a lot of really hardcore fans within our studio. And then as soon as we started digging into the code base and we found God mode, so you couldn't die, the rest of the team was all on board as well, so that worked out really well.
So I guess that's another thing I'm curious about. I assume, like Shadow of the Colossus, you're still running the underlying game code from the original game here, but sort of combining it with your more modern engine and
yeah, we take a very similar approach to what we did on Shadow. And we've talked about that process, how we run both engines side by side. On Shadow, though, we would run, the original Shadow game loop, and then we would run the Bluepoint game loop. This time, there's so much more going on that we've had to, take our technology and really like rethink pieces of it to make it a lot more flexible. That it's more like both game threads are running intertwined with each other. It just keeps it a lot more interesting, but necessary in order, to hit our target frame rates and such.
Right. So can you talk a little bit then about how, let's talk about rendering first. How is the actual like engine? When you got this project, it's obvious, you want to push the visual fidelity. What were some of the big changes that you've made to the technology base to support this game, especially targeting a next generation console?
So yeah, on the rendering side, some of the obvious improvements I'd hope you'd see are the lighting. We have a full real-time global illumination lighting solution. There's been a lot of like little improvements under the hood when it comes to reflections, for example. But yeah, tessellation is a big one as well. That's where a lot of the geometric detail you see on screen comes from, and it also helps with building the content much quicker. But yeah, it's actually quite crazy what the PS5 can do. Like when you turn on a wireframe view of what you're seeing, a lot of times you can't really tell you're looking at a wireframe. It's quite impressive.
Wow, so it just looks like a grid of pixels, perhaps?
Pretty much. Once you turn it on, it's a dynamic tessellating system, so things as they get close to the camera, they tessellate more, and it's a pretty dense wireframe. Like on previous generations of consoles, you would look at a wireframe like that and send it back to the artist and tell them to optimize content, but now, on the PS5, you can actually do a lot of stuff.
That's cool. Another one, real quick, I guess, obviously, you have the performance and you have the quality modes in there. I think you've spoken to it. I guess we don't really have any clarification on the target resolution and the way you're handling sort of like a temporal upscaling or something, kind of thing to reach like 4K, because I assume the quality mode at 30 frames is like a native 4K rendering resolution. Performance mode, are you using sort of a dynamic solution, or is it similar to Shadow where there's like a fixed pixel resolution and you're using other techniques to sort of get the pixel count up?
So it's a bit of both, actually. So we are doing the same thing we did in Shadow, which is the same thing. There's no actual difference between gameplay trailer 1 and 2. We're using the same rendering techniques for the performance mode that you see. It's based on a 1440p base generated frame that then gets temporarily combined into a 4K frame buffer. You get full 4K UI on top. It's dynamic in the sense that actually at the beginning of the game, the character creator, even if you're running in performance mode, is full 4K, 60 FPS. But the actual main game, it drops down to the 1440p.
Cool. And then cinematic mode is definitely native 4K, I assume. Yeah.
It's native 4K at 30, yes.
And I just like to just drop in there and say the really cool thing is like switching between the two. I have a hard time seeing the difference. Even on a giant TV, I have to walk up to the screen and go, oh yeah, there's some tiny little area on his armor that's not the same resolution or stuff like that. Yeah. So, it really is worth, if you're really into your games and you really want that extra input, play at the 60 frames a second. But if you just want beauty, then play at the 30 frames a second, or switch between the two and enjoy it whenever you like. I know that Marco often switches between the two.
It's an interesting experience. You can go one way very easy, going from cinematic to performance mode. That's nice. The game just feels so much better. But going back the other way, it's pretty jarring, right? It's like when you get used to that smoothness of 60 and that better response, the reduced lag you get, and then going back and switching on cinematic mode, it does kind of take your eyes a little bit to adjust, to make things look smooth again. But yeah, it does kind of feel like a slideshow looking 30 FPS, but I'm not telling anybody anything new.
It's still pretty.
Yeah, it's pretty either way for sure.
Super gorgeous.
Yeah,
that's something I've been trying to push, or I think we've all been discussing on our channel more, is that resolution pixel count just doesn't matter that much anymore. It's more about the techniques you used to get to the final image. It used to be a big deal with the old style anti-aliasing, or if you just use an FXAA, or even before that existed. But now with these high pixel counts, I think it's not a big deal. And I agree, it looks really good. You mentioned global illumination. Can you talk a little bit about how your GI system works in this? Is it just in like a screen space GI approach, or is it all pre-calculated, or are you doing some real-time stuff? There's a lot of potential there, and I'm just curious the approach you guys went with.
So the general direction, without giving too much stuff away, I'm sure we'll talk about it at some later point, but essentially we have G-buffer probes that are stored, scattered throughout the environment that we pre-calculate, that contain geometric detail about the environment. It's fairly quick to recalculate that kind of data, and then all actual lighting happens in real time, and so we basically have like this virtual, think of it like a virtual 3D atlas of 3D lighting probes that get dynamically updated, based on which way the camera is looking, expanded to some. So it's kind of like a Froxel-based technique, essentially, that figures out which probes need to be updated in the environment, and then it does real-time updates. So yeah, we fully support moving dynamic light sources. And then, again, there's other additional screen space techniques on top to help with micro-shadowing for tessellation, which is a big deal because, like, real-time shadows, as I was explaining, right, the wireframe is so detailed that you can't really generate real-time shadows for a lot of this stuff, so you have to come up with alternate solutions so you don't push too much geometry through the console.
So are you using sort of a hybrid system, sort of like shadow maps with screen space shadows or something like that?
Correct, yes, yeah. We have, it's not quite screen space shadows, it's actually more a screen space directional occlusion thing, so we can use it for lots of other things as well.
Cool, yeah. That's actually something I was looking at some of the recent footage here, and you can see it in the video, comparing the quality or cinematic mode to the performance mode, and it seems like the two differences that really stuck out to me beyond the slight difference in resolution is there was a little bit of occlusion difference in terms of the precision, perhaps, or maybe it was just that shot, and I also noticed a variation in the tessellation on the ground. Can you talk about your approach to optimizing for 30 and 60 FPS in this game in that sense?
So actually, those two things you mentioned that you noticed as difference, they actually caused by the same exact thing, which is the tessellation difference. So as you get more geometry, you also have more accurate screen space shadows. But yes, general approach was, for us, Demon's Souls was always a 60 FPS game, right? It is always about the Twitch gaming moment, having that reaction time, having that good gameplay. So from the beginning, we designed it as a 60 FPS game in mind, and allowing the cinematic mode, essentially, right? It makes it easy to do cinematic mode because you have more time available to you. So that then allows you to take that extra power and truly just push it towards things to make it slightly look better. But our ultimate goal was the 60 FPS mode and the 30 FPS mode, when you look at them next to each other, they shouldn't look different, right? You shouldn't be like, oh, this is definitely a worse experience. It is designed to be an amazing experience either way and really come down to player's choice. Do that prefer 30 FPS over 60 FPS. And so we dedicated that extra bandwidth that we have on the processor towards increased tessellation settings, higher resolution pixels, obviously, as you noticed, so it's full 4K. And we also do some improvements to reflections as well.
Oh, okay, that's cool then. So yeah, so reflections-wise, you do seem to be using screen space reflections, I believe. Yeah, there's been some rumors around the internet about ray tracing, and I think it's been said that it's not in the game, and maybe you can sort of put the stamp on that and just explain to people the situation, especially building a launch game like this. You can't have everything. There's time limits to things. So I'd like to hear your perspective on this. Was there any experimentation with it? Was there a point where you just said, no, we don't have the time to do this right now. We're going with this solution. Personally, looking at the game, I'm not sure it really needs it. It looks fantastic without it. Especially with the sort of matte materials and the stonework and everything. You don't really need, like, say, ray traced reflections everywhere. So what are your thoughts on this?
Correct. You're 100% correct. There's not a lot of mirrors to be found in Demon's Souls that are all that clean, right? So, yes. So it really did just come down to manpower. We have a launch game to do. There is a certain number of things you can do, and you pick the ones that are the most important to you. And with the size of our engineering staff, even though we're massively excited about the what ray tracing can bring, it just wasn't feasible enough to do ray tracing. Would have had to not be able to do something else. So it purely just came down to a time function. We're really excited about it, and what we've seen so far is quite amazing, but we just didn't have the manpower to implement it in time for launch.
But I can imagine one thing you've probably taken advantage of, and it's something we haven't seen yet, is the super fast SSD. and the decompression systems and everything. Can you talk about how you use this in Demon Souls and how it sort of benefits the experience? I think a lot of people are curious about this.
Yeah. I think the day that we turned on the fast loading coming off of the SSD was the day that we changed the devs' lives as far as the amount of, how many iterations and stuff they can do within the game without sitting on a loading screen. I think one of the things that sort of caught us a little bit by surprise was, as we started turning this on, and, one of the big things in Demon Souls is you die and you respawn, you come back, is that we had to look at it and make sure that, we maintained our pacing within the game as you transition from area to area to make sure that you actually, you get that moment to breathe or whatever as you're moving, that you don't go too fast. But yeah, I've been really impressed with what PS5 is able to do with the loading. And it's really, it hasn't been that difficult either to implement. And so a lot of it feels like a lot of really free wins there.
I'd imagine you also save time on, like, say, the CPU side, where you don't have to worry about compression or decompression there. It can be offloaded to the decompression block and everything. And that sounds very beneficial.
Absolutely. Like on the, I was just gonna say, like on the PS4, working with Shadow and stuff, we'd have to go through and compress all of our textures, and we'd use Kraken compression, which is provided by Rad Tools, and then on the CPU side, we'd have to decompress everything and then transfer mem copy it over into the correct buffers and such. Nowadays on the PS5, all of that's handled by the hardware on the back end. So to us as a developer, it does not look like we're compressing any of our assets at all, but we're really getting the best compression that we can get is if we'd done it in the software, but we're getting it all on the hardware side. So it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, actually, to add to that, it would actually be impossible to do it in software, because when you're loading data at 3-4 gigabytes per second compressed, the power needed to decompress that much data quickly, you have to have a hardware solution. You can't do it in software. It's just not fast enough. So when Sony designed the console, they took all those components into account. Like from beginning to end, you can't have any bottlenecks in that whole loading pipeline. Otherwise, it's great to be able to load fast, but then you're sitting for seconds waiting for an asset to decompress, and you just don't have the time.
I think also, just jumping back to the SSD, it's incredibly important to mention that the original difficulty of the game is probably based on frustration of the loading time on the PlayStation 3. So you would die, you would then wait 2 minutes to load back into the game, which would frustrate the hell out of you, and then you would die again, and it would become this cyclic loop, and you think it would be terribly difficult. But with the SSD on the PlayStation 5, you die, fades to black, fades back up, and you're back in the game again to take revenge. And that's incredibly important. It takes the frustration out of the game, gameplay-wise. And Peter's incredibly correct about the pacing. That SSD is stupidly fast. I mean, I remember Peter saying to me, I was like, come on, get the super fast loading in, get the super fast loading in. He's like, yeah, under 5 minutes, right? And that was the internal joke for months. And then you went in and it was just, wow, that's crazy. Having to wait before, and then suddenly this super fast loading goes in. It's just a godsend to being able to jump back into your game and stay in your game and carry on the adventure.
So that's good news then. It's both fairly easy to implement from your perspective, and it seems to provide immediate results, which is something that makes me think about how this can impact game design. Like in this case, you're remaking a game, but how did this actually play into, like, say, the world design? Because the original Demon Souls, you have that hub system, and each environment you'd visit was a separately loaded map, which is something that changed with Dark Souls. Does this allow the game to become more seamless now on PlayStation 5?
Oh, absolutely. It absolutely affects, the amount of data that we're able to push and the resolution and the experience that we're able to give. Even if you load into a world, like say you take the first world and you load into Boletaria, that world is chunked up into a whole bunch of little pieces that we basically stream in and out as you move through the world. And so everything's dynamically streaming as you go, along with all of our textures. And so basically what it allows us to do is, like on a PS4, we would go through and we'd do the same sort of thing, but we'd have to be much more tolerant about how long does it take for each one of these chunks to load in, and we'd have to give ourselves time. On the PS5, we can be a lot more aggressive about loading chunks right as you turn the corner, not, halfway down the hallway before you get there. which basically allows us to say that we need less stuff in memory at all times. So we can basically take the areas that we're pushing and we can up the detail and up the textures because they can all come in time before the player gets there.
Wow, that's super cool, actually. I'm really curious to see how this is going to play out then. So does this then sort of follow that same structure then? You still have the hub world and all the different areas. It's just that now when you transition from one area to another, you're not waiting at a load screen any longer. You just sort of walk straight there.
Right. Well, in the original game, you know, so the layout is the same as the original game. And if you're familiar with the layout of the original, you will know what the remake looks like. But the big thing is in the original, they would go through and say, well, we have this whole section and we have to load it all as one big chunk. And they would do a little bit of streaming, but we're able to basically go through and say, we don't care what the original game did with its streaming strategy. We're going to change it and we're going to be a lot more aggressive so that not only between the worlds is the loading time greatly reduced, and basically it's fog come up, fog come down, and you're in the world. But now as we move through the level, we're able to have, obviously there's 0 loading screens like the original game, but we're able to keep our sections smaller, which basically allows us to increase, fidelity.
Oh, that's cool. So actually that's one thing then, is you guys talked about for Shadow of the Colossus that one of the challenges was that you had to generate so much more art than any other project in the past because you remade everything. This one is obviously, as you've also said, significantly more ambitious. How has this changed your studio in terms of the available manpower or your work processes?
I think that's kind of funny because I looked back at Shadow and I remember finishing that up and thinking, that was a lot of work. I look at what we've now accomplished with Demon Souls and I look back at Shadow and I was like, that seemed like a cakewalk to the amount of stuff that we've had to do. But it's been great because it's really pushed our studio. I think across the board we've grown. Our art department has come night and day compared to where we'd grown a lot for Shadow. We are so much stronger and better today. With and part of it comes down to, well, we rebuild these areas and we push the fidelity to brand new levels. It's where do we create detail where detail never existed before? And so that basically requires us to look at it, taking into account, the framework that the original provided, but you're really looking at it and using all the techniques that you would if you were doing original game development of, concepting everything out, putting it in there, prototyping, and then revisiting it 18 times in order to refine it to get the, exactly what you need. So it's been exciting and very challenging, but in the end, like we sort of talked about on Shadow, that we had touched and changed everything. The same thing holds true here on Demon Souls, that we've gone through and we've touched pretty much every single asset, figured out how everything works, and everything's been modified.
I think it's also important to say that everything that was created in the game, taking it back to the drawing board, as Peter said, is all based on the original vision. Nothing is ever decided without everybody getting on board and saying, yeah, that's the right direction to go in, that's the right way, and staying true to that vision. And Peter's absolutely correct. I mean, it's amazing to see the amount of detail in these levels, and it's incredibly cool for the actual game because it actually enhances the story. Every room, every corridor, every boss arena now tells a story, and that makes it into a character in its own right. And that just makes the world bigger and makes the story bigger. And you feel you're encompassed and enveloped in this world. So it's really amazing with the power of the PlayStation 5 and the skill of the Bluepoint guys, and I know how much work they had to do because I know how I was there step by step with them, and I've seen how hard they worked, and it's truly incredible.
So actually, how long was the overall development process for this, and was this the longest you've worked on a single game to date?
We started right after Shadow. This was definitely, we're 3 years, just short maybe. It's a pretty massive effort. Also, our studio size has grown quite a bit. I think at the peak, just internal staff was over 90. So yeah, there's a lot of people, and that doesn't count all the countless outsourcing. The musicians, like Gavin has spoken to it before. There's 120 musicians that recorded the score. There's mocap actors that completely re-recorded every single player move on the animations and lots of other moves. We expanded the animation move set to include full female animation sets. There's just so much stuff. The sound design, the amount of sound. That's something that kind of links back to the streaming question from earlier. Being able to stream a lot more also means you can have a lot more sounds, because you can stream a lot more sounds now. They don't all have to be loaded into memory anymore. So yeah, the amount of content, the amount of people that worked on this title is just impressive. And then 3 years. And don't forget, you basically started with a complete game, right? So it's really, you spent those 3 years and all those people just making it better.
I think it's also important to say, this is a real global effort. The guys in Bluepoint, they're the core team, they're the developers of the game, and we're driving this around the world. So we've had outsourcing in China, Malaysia, Vietnam, with all these great companies. We're using our resource teams, as Marco says, our motion capture studios in San Diego, our sound teams up in San Francisco, 120 musicians. It's really a AAA title, and that's how much we respect the title and how much we respect the original creator's vision. It's incredibly important that we do this game justice, and I believe we have, and I think it's a testament to Bluepoint's skill, really, that they've come through and done such a grand job on this.
Before we get to the next thing, though, I am curious, did you get a chance to work at all with the original From Software team? Are any of them actually still working at From Software?
So we got the blessing from the original creators, but they weren't involved in the actual development of the game. The full production was taken on by Worldwide Studios and Bluepoint Games, obviously staying true to the original vision. But as I say, we had the original creators' blessing.
All right, so Marco, you mentioned that you redid the animation work. So I kind of want to get into models and animation in general. And I guess one of the first... So this is just kind of a funny old time kind of thing, is like back in the day, whenever a new console generation arrived, one of the first things people would talk about is how many polygons does that character have? So I'm kind of wondering if you have sort of an average on just how many triangles are in one of those Demon Souls main character models when he's all armored up.
Honestly, if I had to guess, Peter, do you have a guess? Because honestly, we have GPU bars on screen, and as long as those are green, we're happy as programmers. So a lot of it comes down to how much detail do you need, and that's how much you use. Like, we did not really set very strict polygon limits for just about anything. We were a very good LOD system that we use, and so on top of that, it basically is just like I know on Shadow, right, our bar was always like, oh, it's about 250,000 triangles per boss, right? Which, to me at the time, sounded crazy, right? But now, it's gotten to the point where you almost don't pay attention anymore. And there's so many dynamic little elements on the characters, like, cloth and stuff, that it's actually becomes hard to track. But Peter, do you have a rough idea?
I was glad that he asked you that question, because...
Again, it's wireframe is so dense that you most of the time can't tell a difference. I would say the characters are at the top LOD definitely in excess of 60,000 triangles for just the normal human-sized characters.
So I guess that's actually an interesting point then, is it's actually reached the point where you have enough available power on just in terms of drawing triangles that you don't even really need to think about it at this point.
I mean, you always have to think about it, right? But it's just
well, yeah, you gotta think about it, but it's less of a concern.
Yep.
I think it swings and roundabouts, though, at the end of the day, John. I mean, you get all this freedom. I think the artists get all this freedom to go away and create these amazing models, but that then takes an incredible amount of skill to actually do. You have to know a ton of software to achieve that and create that. Plus, you have to have incredible artistic talent, and it takes time. And that's the problem we're always up against, especially with a large title, is time. So, it swings and roundabouts at the end of the day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's something I've thought about a lot lately, where I feel like we're approaching the point where the biggest limitation with visuals is actually manpower and budget, as opposed to just straight hardware power, because you just have so much of it available. It's just, what can you actually realistically do in a time frame? So
a lot of that comes actually to working smart and not hard, right? Like, one example being tessellation. It adds a lot of detail, whereas before in Stonefang, to build that kind of detailed floor, you'd have to go by hand and then place individual bricks, right? Now you can just apply a material and kind of like paint blend channels between materials and get automatic bricks appearing and dirt building up between the bricks. Also procedural workflows, right? So we rely heavily on Houdini to help build procedural geometry. Artists can take whole walls, paint patterns on them where they want the wall to break, and then the wall will break that chunk out, automatically place bricks at the intersection points, and fill in the gaps and stuff. So it is having a really, really talented art staff. It is having good tools and good processes. It's really like the whole collection of it all. And it definitely helps to have a great looking game to begin with, to start with, as inspiration.
Oh yeah, for sure. Actually, that's interesting. So talking about the environment, how do you handle things like breakables?
So it's a combination of things. I'll let Peter speak to the dynamic destructibles, kind of. But yeah, we definitely have destruction sequences that are baked out, cinematic sequences and stuff that are baked out of Houdini. So you get like geocaches coming out that then we bake down into animation. So you're getting kind of like a mixture of both. But I'll let Peter talk to actually our destructibles, because they're actually quite amazing.
Yeah, we've actually spent a lot of time on the physics side of this game. And one of the big things was basically increasing the fidelity of the destructibles that are in the levels. And all From Software games have been known to, they have a large number of destructibles. And so we wanted to make sure to push that. And we also wanted to make sure that we improved it a bit. And so basically what we're doing there is we're taking models and then we're taking them into Houdini, and then we will basically fracture them and break them. And so all of our breaks are predetermined. And then we have, as take a barricade or something like that, we'll have 5 or 6 varieties of those things placed throughout areas. And so then with the destructibles, they're placed in the levels. And then we've gone through and we've added support for multi-layered destructibles so that we can have stuff like shelving systems with pots and pans or other things on the shelves where you can break each of the individual things and then break the top shelf with leaving the bottom shelf, and so you have multi-stage destruction. We've also spent a lot of optimization time to basically make sure that we can increase the density of the destructibles in areas so that we can go through and make sure that our shelves are fully populated, and that when you go into a room, try to create consistency so that as the player learns that pretty much everything is breakable in this area, that we're able to hold that and maintain, that level of immersion throughout the entire world. And that part has actually been very challenging. The other thing that we spent a lot of time on is we wanted to make sure that we didn't run into the standard problems of I break this table or I break this chair that then lands on top of this other thing, but then you break that, which then leaves all these floating pieces. Or, some of the games are very familiar, if you're familiar with them. A very common problem is, boards will come and lay up against the player or something of that nature. Then you walk away and you get all these floating pieces throughout the environment, which, the interaction is awesome. But when you start seeing those floating pieces, it starts breaking that immersion and starts making you realize that you're actually in a video game as opposed to in the world where you're supposed to be. And so we spent a lot of time parenting things and creating optimization structures to basically ensure that if anything breaks, all the proper pieces are rewoken up and resim and fall down to the ground smoothly. And so it's been a fun undertaking.
Yeah. So the reason that necessitates all this complexity and all these optimizations is the fact that in Souls games, destructibles don't fade away and disappear, right? In our game, if you had destructibles in an environment actually fade out and disappear, you'd end up with a bunch of empty rooms potentially, because there's just so many destructibles in the environment. So that's also another thing you have to keep in mind. Like, as you walk through an area and destroy things and then come back, they're still there. They're still destroyed. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
And along those lines, like that's been one of our interesting challenges that we've had to address is, if you break something within a world, if you die and reset, everything gets reset like it did in the original. However, if you go through an area and break a bunch of stuff, and then you move through the world and you move to completely different areas, because our zones are smaller, we start unloading all of those destructibles and everything as you move through the world. And as you return to it, we need to remember exactly how it was broken, where each one of the pieces were, so that if you'd push them around or such, that they're remembered. They're not just pre-canned, broken sequences. And then at the same time, we've added the ability to burn stuff. So in the original, you could catch the player on fire or some of the enemies on fire. Um, in our version, you're able to burn destructibles and the whole sequence, and then also use magic, which then has special effects on the destructibles as well. So we need to remember all of those states, so that as you leave an area and come back, everything's basically restored to exactly how you left it.
Wow, that's how much data are you moving around to do that? That's pretty impressive, actually.
A fair amount.
And also, actually thinking of the burning system, is this sort of like materials driven? Like wood behaves one way versus, like, I don't know, some other material that might have fire apply, or is it really just like wood catches fire? Because I guess most of the destructibles are generally wood in this world.
They are, however, and this has been one of the challenging. It just increases the amount of data, as you try to increase the fidelity of your game and tie the player into it. From individual players to the enemies to their weapons to the destructibles to whether it's a metal pot or it's a wooden crate. Our art staff goes through and creates burn masks and burn textures for every single thing that's in the game, and then hooks them up so they can be dynamically controlled in our materials system. And then based upon the type of thing that it is, it's basically set up to burn in different ways. And so then there's a combination of material system and particle systems, that come together to basically sell the effect. But it is, art going through and tagging and creating these textures for every single thing. Like, as we went through towards the end of the game, one of our fears were there's so many different combinations of things that we would end up missing. We'd miss a sword or we'd miss a state on one of the armor pieces or something like that. And so it was going through and testing, make sure every destructible has these 5 states all set up correctly. Make sure every armor piece has all these 5 states. And, there was a couple that got missed that we'd have to go back and go through and fix and add, the whole material layers and state to. But yeah, it's a lot of work.
I also think it's a holistic way of game creation. If you look at the way that engine runs, it's incredible. The way that the wind system works, so when you throw a fireball, the trail of the particles coming off the fireball as it travels, across a bridge or something, the wind will go up the wall over the bridge and blow those particles the way the wind's blowing. When the fireball hits the wall and it's covered in ivy, you can see all the ivy, flutter and move. It's an incredible system. It's holistic. It feels like the world is alive. And that's incredibly important when you're trying to bring something which is a PlayStation classic to life. And that's important for users who've played this game in the past and now they're actually playing a game which they imagine it to be. It really is alive, this world, and it's incredible the way you feel that you're in the world. So when you add, this amazing tessellation technology, you add, the dynamic systems, you add the wind systems, the incredible particles, the incredible lighting, the incredible shadows, suddenly the world of Boletaria, is no longer just a fog-ridden land that you once adventured in. It's a real world that you feel that you're actually, on a quest in.
I love all this, the new physics and the destruction stuff. That's really, really ambitious, and I think that's going to add a lot to the experience. I have to wonder, though, one of the fun quirks of that is the way that the corpse is ragdoll. How did you guys approach that? Because I think some fans loved the exaggerated ragdoll, but I feel like if you transport that into this much more realistic looking game, it just gets silly. So how did you tackle that problem?
So that's interesting. And I think the original game was notorious for, even with destructibles, that you would get the broken wagon wheel that would be stuck around your waist, as you run around half the level trying to just get it off. So we took a much more realistic approach. And part of it, making game, been in the industry for a long time, and you look at just like the evolution of ragdolls, and the ragdolls at the very beginning, they felt like these big jello puff things, that it was just cool that you had interaction as opposed to the static body. And you look at like where we're at today, where we're trying to be a lot more realistic and, not get stuck on you. And, it's more like you want interaction, but you don't want it needs to be realistic. And so we took kind of that approach of trying to make it much more realistic. Some of it is, one of the great things about working on this title is, we always ask ourselves, like, what would the original game developer do if they rebuilt this game today on this hardware? And what would that picture look like, and how do we emulate that the best we can? And with From Software, there's, they've got a series of games that we can look at, so we can sort of see the direction in which they would take stuff. And so we felt like creating much heavier ragdoll bodies and trying to create more realistic experiences with them would fit better. And so I think that I feel like we've done a really good job of creating a balance of, creating ragdolls that are heavier, they behave more like you would expect them to, they keep you immersed in the world, but they're still fully, you can interact with them, like you can still push them around a bit and work with them. I think one of the really cool things is that I like to, or that I've seen, it's more our QA staff that I've seen them do, is they kill all the enemies next to a bonfire, and then they push them all into the bonfire, and then each one of the ragdolls then individually all catch on fire, and so you can basically build shapes out of burning corpses within the environment. So it's pretty cool.
I just want to add, we're not condoning that people do that. All right,
No,
that's something.
no.
Yeah, right. And to original fans of the game, yeah, it's still fun trying to push dead bodies off a cliff. I mean, that's why everybody loves ragdolls, basically.
Can you talk a little bit more about the new animation system then? It sounds like you captured a lot of new animation data. Like, how has it changed? Is it sort of like a continuation from your work on Shadow, or is this a completely new thing? What can we expect?
I think, Gavin, you'd be perfect to speak to this, since you were actually at all the mocap recordings together with our animation lead.
Yeah, so I spent a long time. I think we did 4-5 mocap sessions, recapturing all the player character animations. And as Marco said, we added a whole new set for the female characters in the game as well, so everything's unique. We added a bunch of unique weapon animations, which are incredible. It really brings those weapons to life. I really love watching, the different backstabs and riposte now and the different weapons that you carry. But it was difficult, We knew we couldn't change the cadence, the timing of any of those animations for the player character, because that would change the gameplay. So it was hours of meticulous, metronome timings of people running in a studio hour after hour, getting those timings correct, or the exact timing when he shoves his sword into the body and throws the character to the ground and pulls it out, trying to match all those timings. It wasn't easy at all, but it's just a testament to the team, both in San Diego, the motion capture studio, the motion capture actors. Eric was incredible. And obviously, Chris, the animation lead for Bluepoint, it was stunning. And after, 4 or 5 sessions of how many weeks, I don't know, but it really shows, I think, in the game how good the animation system is now and how realistic it feels. And yet it doesn't change the gameplay. I don't feel that when I, switch between the legacy mode or this mode, that, apart from obviously the frame rate changes, which makes it super smooth, it just looks better.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so moving along then, another thing I wanted to ask about was if you've taken advantage of the Tempest engine, the sound technology talked about for PlayStation 5. Like, can we expect sort of the 3D positional audio? Like, how has this changed in terms of implementing the audio in this game? You already mentioned you can use more sounds and higher quality sounds, but what about the 3D side of things?
So that new Tempest 3D audio engine, that's an incredible 360-degree sphere that surrounds you, and that means that we can add a bunch of new sounds into the game to bring those levels alive. So you can really feel that the world has come alive now, and that makes the whole storytelling experience, just so much more refreshing. You can feel Boletaria spies creep up behind you in the, Palace of Boletaria, or things slither out of the slime in the Valley of Defilement. But for me, the thing that freaks me out every time, and I still do it, is when I get shot by an arrow. I can hear it coming, and I physically move my body to one side or the other when I shouldn't. I know I shouldn't do it, but it still makes me do it, But I don't know. How do you guys feel about the audio now when it's in 3D?
Oh, I love it. Like, it used to be like you would put headphones on and you would be lacking in experience. At this point, with the the binaural modeling they do of the ears, you getting this perfect 3D sound field that's coming through. I realize that some people kind of respond to it differently, right? So I would definitely make sure you adjust the settings on the system side to calibrate it to your ears as good as possible. But it's actually quite an amazing experience, like hearing the dragon, passing over you and getting the proper frequency response as the audio changes. And it's also kind of like, it's a little geeky. It's awesome for programmers because it's basically like combining spherical harmonics with audio. It's like math nerdness, it's awesome.
I think it's interesting because when you talk about a remake or doing a title like Demon's Souls, usually you always focus on what does the graphical fidelity look like, and then you start talking a little bit about like, well, did you give us some quality of life improvements, or did you add new content? Like what kind of stuff did you add there? And really, like pushing this on the PS5 and the stuff that we've done with the audio, it's kind of like normally you feel like the audio is taking a backseat, or it just sort of works out and it just happened. But here it's like it's on par with what we've had to do with environments and levels. From an art content side, the audio team has been working just as hard, and it's almost just as big, and has just as much stuff to go through and do in order to create that experience.
Correct. In addition to just the 3D part of it, there's also, again, like meeting that quality bar of just everything being much better, right? And so whereas in a previous game we just have, hey, that player's on sand, or he's on stone, or he's walking on a wooden surface, and then audio guys would hook up like 3 or 4 random sounds that kind of like interswitch with some pitch randomization to make it not sound too repetitive. Like these days, you can just do so much more, where the artist assign materials at the render level on the render meshes, and then our player will actually figure out exactly what combination of surface are you standing on. Okay, that's 20% puddle and 50% dirt and 30% something else like pebble or rocks. And so we feed all that data to the audio side, so they can use that to properly mix stuff and make the right choices on their end. Like, so you get a much more dynamic experience too as you're walking through the environment. It's not as much of hearing the same repetitive sound. They have a lot more flexibility.
And it's also important to say that the original vision, of the game, where you play through the levels with no music, so the sound comes alive on its own. So the sound is what drives that level. Is quite a masterpiece of game design, actually, for way back when. And so by adding all these sounds and making sure it's in 3D, and just by plugging your headphones into the controller, this world is really there around you. And then when you get into a section like a boss battle and the music floods in, that becomes, incredible. That sense that you suddenly feel the challenge, and, the music is spurring you on to defeat the boss. It's an incredible piece of game design, actually.
Oh, that's awesome then. And I assume, like the visuals, everything, all the audio, it's completely original, but derived from or inspired by the original game.
Yeah, there's nothing that we don't ever look at the original and just add things for adding's sake. It's always taken, very, very seriously by the team. And as Peter said, there are a lot of Demon's Souls fans, in both WWS and Bluepoint. And so it's a very serious, discussion that goes on. But that's the thing about the PlayStation 5 and doing a remake. I think, you have to be careful that you're true to the original vision, but at the same time, you want to utilize all of this power. There are great fits like the SSD, which immediately, you go for the loading. It just makes the game less frustrating, right? And I think with sound and 3D audio, it's something that just fits straight into Demon's Souls, and made it feel so natural.
Very cool. Okay, there's a few more rendering things I wanted to ask about, actually. One of my favorite things I've seen in the trailers was from the recent gameplay footage, I guess from October, where you're fighting the large spider boss, and he sort of fires out that oily substance that then catches on fire. It's a very impressive and dynamic effect, and it seems to have zero impact on the frame rate as well. Can you talk about what that is, how you did it? And yeah, it's cool.
I'm a programmer. Half the time the artist surprised me with stuff that I didn't know was possible. So I can give you my best guess at some of these things. I know that the actual oil layer that spreads out, we have a dynamic material system that where blends can drive tessellation layers. So I'm pretty certain they had the ground set up to have that separate oil layer already on it, and then they were able to just dynamically update the blend mask essentially on the material to have the oil puff up. We're actually doing something similar during like the first boss battle. For people that remember Failings, he leaves a slime trail behind. In our game, he'll actually leave slime build up on the ground as the boss moves through the environment. But going back to the specific instance, and then after that, we just have a particle system that kind of spawns on top and actually spawns particle directly from the geometry. So it's going to be some amazing combination and probably another good week's worth, if not more, of art twiddling and making things amazing in ways I can't even comprehend.
That's a perfect example of where we're staying true to the original, but trying to make it as spectacular with the power of the PlayStation 5 that we possibly could. That's a great design choice. You know, that replaces an attack which is an explosive gas attack that fires out, the spider fires out a gas and then it catches fire. And it was very difficult to tell where you were inside the gas, whether you were going to be hit by it or not. And then switching it to this new attack, you can actually physically feel the tension. It adds and builds to the tension of the gameplay. And it forces you all the way back down the corridor again. So when it goes out, you have to fight your way all the way back to the spider again, you know, to actually do it damage. So it's a great way where art, sound, and game design, and obviously this, you know, the engine and the programmers can all come together, you know, and take a specific one single piece where the original inspired something new. So it's a great example of that.
Yeah, that's really cool too, because legibility is really important in these action games like this, kind of like it used to be back in the 8 and 16-bit days. So it's neat to see how a higher fidelity effect is actually easier to read than what was originally in the game. So that's a testament to both impressive visuals and good design. So I like that a lot. And I guess from there, another thing, the particle system, especially in the last part of that video, when you're fighting the large flame creature, there's particles everywhere in the air. There's flame trails. Like, how are you doing your particles? How has it evolved since the previous game?
So yeah, it's actually very similar to the particle system we used on Shadow. It's really just an evolution of that exact system. And as a reminder, that system ran fully on the GPU, single draw call for all the particles on the screen. Every single particle is perfectly sorted. But again, it's the amount of GPU power, right? We have the particles are properly lit. They're deferredly lit. All those, I mean, embers, obviously the main particles you're talking about, they're not actually lit because they give off light themselves. But any other particles, they are all properly lit and properly rendered. The one thing that is a big improvement, I think, on this specific game is the thing that Gavin was hinting at earlier with the wind and the integration of the systems. So we have a lot more things tying in. We actually have baked out wind fields in environments that we use for flow. So in that specific arena, we actually had built in the heat vents on the ground that would help push the particles kind of up and create some of that swirling motion. Boss attacks, magic attacks. You can actually see it in the last gameplay trailer. There's an amazing sequence where it's just like one of those little moments, right? You're in a tunnel, you're shooting a magic projectile down the tunnel, and the chains react and swing out of the way from the shockwave from the attack that you're shooting off. I think it's just all those tiny little elements that fit together to just create that believable world, right? And particles are a big part of that. So when you shoot a flame ball or an energy projectile like Soul Ray, the little tiny sparks that are left behind, or the little embers that get behind, get properly affected by wind. Or if you were to shoot another attack through the trail of that old attack, it would affect those particles and create a much more believable system. And again, it's having good artists. A lot of it comes down to having good artists that know how to use the system.
I think one of the biggest improvements that we've made to our particle system, for this game is we utilize static distance fields a lot more than we've ever done before. And so really what that allows us to do is, when we have a dragon flying over a bridge, filling it with fire, we're able to tell exactly where the particle systems can tell exactly where the geometry is. And so we're able to mold the particles to the formation of the bridge. And so it gives a very realistic effect. I think you can see it in the trailers. Like if you look at the old hero fight, he's got this yellowish glow about him, and as his sword penetrates the columns or any of the geometry, we leave this trail behind. And so using the SDFs, we're able to tell, exactly where does the sword impact the environment and such. And so it gives that level of detail of it connects, the particle systems directly to the environment so they can see the full picture. I think that's got to be one of our bigger improvements.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, I remember sitting in Bluepoint in Austin in their boardroom with the guys, and I remember saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if you threw a fireball down a tunnel and it caught cobwebs on fire?" And then, lo and behold, 3 years later, now we throw fireballs down a tunnel and things all come to life and all things are affected, and it's, an amazing experience. And as Marco said, it hits chains and things catch fire, and it's all of this, holistic view to the world. So it's just incredible.
I love that. So everything seems very systems driven now. The physics tie into the particles, tie into the effect. Like everything just sort of works together to create a very cohesive looking image. And you can really see that in the footage. And another nice visual touch that I really like. So I remember in Shadow, you actually use these like capsule shadows, I guess, to do the like indirect, very diffuse shadow around the character. One of the trademarks of these Souls games is you always have a light source attached to your character. And the way it works in this one is it seems like the light source always casts a very, very diffuse shadow from the player. How are you doing that? Is it still capsule shadows, or are you doing something else a little different? It's really great looking, I think.
It's a combination. It's always a combination of techniques. A lot of dynamic character shadows of that soft type are created, as you're correctly guessing, by capsules. But it combines with our screen space directional occlusion techniques to build those soft shadows. So as the player walks past, a door frame, for example, you're walking through that door frame, you see the shadows being cast. Or as you're walking over a brick path, each of the bricks will cast nice soft shadows, between the cracks. And that combined with we're using it also for like blocking out specular reflections that shouldn't arrive in cracks, for example. It really helps bring the realism, like all those kind of things. It really is in our game. Every single light source has dynamic shadows. They might not be shadow maps, but they have dynamic shadows. So when you have a single individual blood message sitting on the ground, it will properly cast shadows on tessellated bricks. If you have a particle light from any explosion or a projectile, or even a spark from hitting a surface, they will cast proper, nice, soft shadows. They're limited in range, but it's enough for the eye because they're like quick moments, right? So I think that is the key thing, honestly, in our lighting system, the fact that every single light has a shadow.
I love that. Yeah, that really, and that, again, that contributes to this holistic view of the world where everything sort of feeds into another thing.
Well, light and shadow is what defines shapes. If we implemented just tessellation, and we had this in the beginning, right? When you're inside a dark ambient shadow tunnel and you have tessellated surfaces, you can't actually tell, because you need the light and shadow and to help define the shapes to actually make it readable to the person looking at it.
Okay, so another thing that I'm curious about, obviously one of the big shifts for PlayStation 5 is the significantly more capable CPU. How has that freed you up, or in what ways have you been able to take advantage of just having a lot more CPU grunt to go alongside the GPU power?
I think the interesting part is, we've had to really look at, what our threading solution is. And we basically have a job system that we've had to revisit a couple of times to basically, I would say now it's kind of like a job system on steroids. But the challenge is finding work to parallelize. But there's enough processor power that we're not able to utilize all of it as efficiently as we would like to, and so there's more power there than we use. But yeah, it's I think the biggest thing about using all of it is basically figuring out how many of these various pieces can we parallelize, especially when we go back and we look at the original engine that was basically a single threaded model for 90% of the game update loop. And now it's like, can we update all of our characters in parallel? Can we run our animation trees in parallel? How many pieces can we basically parallelize in order to, utilize the CPUs? And, it's really been critical in order for us to hit 60 FPS.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of other additional things to add on. One that just stuck out to me So I have one of the videos running now is the boss at the end of the September footage. He's got a lot of mass on him, shall we say, and a lot of dangly bits and like flesh that moves around. Basically all these secondary animations. How are you guys handling that? Because it looks really fluid, I think.
And that's another key thing. Those are all real physics. The chains on the Vanguard, they're real physics that properly collide with that body, and that's where you're getting that realistic experience. If you had tried to bake that kind of motion into the animations, you would see it. As the animations transition, you would see weird pops that don't look natural. But pretty much all of our enemies have some form of dynamic element on it, whether it's a little satchel on the back that has arrows in it, whether it's a piece of clothing, whether it's hair on characters. Like your most basic enemy, the Dregling, has multiple dynamic objects on it which help improve the quality of the animation, because as animations transition, right, you get nice follow through on all those dynamic pieces. They don't do weird rapid snap transitions as animations change. So you're getting much more fidelity out of these dynamic things. And we've had multiple artists working nonstop on all these characters, setting up all these tiny things, whether it's a floppy nipple or a chain, right?
You've been in the unique position of working with the code bases of other developers a lot, and you've kind of mastered this way of transforming that into your own thing. Without, going too much into the depths there, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts to share on basically, working with From Software's code base for PlayStation 3, and how it was to work with it, compared to, like, say, Shadow of the Colossus, where you're pulling the old PS2 code from that, or I guess even Uncharted, which was, a Western developed game, so that's going to have its own unique things going on with it.
As Peter was mentioning earlier, every engine is really its own unique snowflake. There really isn't such a thing as like one engine is worse or than another, or like written much worse. Every company has their own styles, their own ways of working, and really that's what we get exposed to. It's like just how many different possible ways there is of doing the same thing, right? And those things also change over time. When you have a game that originally used to be a PS2 game, you sometimes did things in different ways. Or if you come from a background where maybe you worked on arcade style games, you would have fixed update loops that didn't even track time, for example. So every developer has their own complete different way of working. Some are more data driven, some are more code driven. So how was the From engine? Just different than anything else we've ever done. There's really no like it's one way or another. It's every code base does something in really interesting ways that, like, you would think that after all this time we'd get to a point where we get a code base and it's like, yep, this is exactly all the stuff I've seen before. But there's at least always one surprise in there.
And I assume your tools for handling Japanese comments have continued to pay dividends.
Yes, that is almost the first thing we run on every single project. As soon as we get the code base, we run an automatic tool on it that goes through the whole code and converts all the comments from whatever language they happen to be into English for us to help try to better understand. And then it still leaves the original comments in there. It just, adds them in there for us to see. But no, that has definitely been a helpful tool for us.
That's probably going to do it for now. We've been at this for a solid hour. I really appreciate your time, gentlemen. It was an absolute pleasure to get some additional details into this, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the game, which hopefully shouldn't be too long. So thanks again for joining me here.
We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very
so
much.
much. Thank you.
And as always, good luck with any other projects in the future. I'm sure they will be every bit as cool as this
We're
one.
looking forward to what people think of what we do next, as always.
Well, first of all, everybody go out there and pick up a copy of Demon Souls, because it really is an amazing experience. And we do want to see what the fans think of, of the game, and what all those photos they're going to take in photo mode and share, and the characters they're going to create in the amazing new character creator. So please pick it up and share everything with us.
Great. Excellent. Well, that's going to do it for now. So thanks for everybody watching. If you made it all the way to the end, that's awesome. And yeah, if you enjoyed it, be sure to let us know, like, subscribe, all the regular stuff. And until next time, this is John and the Bluepoint Fellows all signing off.